Kara Goucher, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. And I'm excited to talk about The Longest Race. But before we get into topics related to the book, I know this because I'm a fan, you're a little over a year into regularly publishing the Nobody Asked Us podcast with your co-host, Des Linden. And I'm curious from a content standpoint, what is exciting you most right now about the show, or like what are you excited to bring to the media side of the sport for a running audience?
Yeah, I mean, we just wanted to be able to talk freely, right? Like we just wanted to be able to talk about what we wanted to talk about. It's kind of funny because it's so unpolished. Like we'll just text each other the day before we record and we'll pitch ideas to each other. And like we're recording in a couple days and I pitched like, let's talk about contracts. So it's really just free flowing. Obviously we react to things that are happening in the running world, but I think that's what's been so fun about it is it isn't like, oh, we have to discuss this or we have to discuss this. We can just kind of go where it takes us.
Do you feel like you have a similar amount of creative freedom and the ability, I guess, to speak freely, like you did in this book, The Longest Race, where it felt like there had to be a certain level of like courageousness to take a stand on certain issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the whole point. Like we didn't want to talk about stuff and be muffled or try to like sugarcoat anything. At the same time, we also want to remain employed. So there is like a little bit of making sure we're not super offensive. What we do is we
For
log
sure.
on and we talk for like 20 minutes before we record and we get at all the things that like we know we can't say. It's as real as it can get with us still having jobs. You know, like every once in a while we would love to
Yeah.
add a little like snarky comment, but um we're in general, we're really just saying what we want to say.
I remember, and this is from The Longest Race, I remember an excerpt from the book where you said that you had always thought that you would transition into coaching or a marketing role or like a shoe design type role. But then once you were embroiled in all of that controversy inside the Nike Oregon project, there were times where you kind of questioned that future and you questioned whether you would have a role in the industry after everything kind of transpired. And it makes me wonder because obviously you've been resilient and you've worked really hard. But have you been surprised at how things have seemed to work out and you've kind of found not just like career stability, but from like a fan standpoint, it looks like you've been kind of thriving in the running community in the last, 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's really been the last few years where I feel comfortable in my own skin and I feel comfortable that some people are going to like me and some people aren't. Like even when I first got the job from NBC, my very first job I had was at the Pepsi Relays in Eugene, and the day before they gave us a tour of the new facility and I'm seeing pictures of Alberto Salazar everywhere. And I
Yeah.
was just like, I can't be here. Like I called Adam and I was like, this is not for me. Like I don't even feel safe here, you know? And it took
Mm.
time and it took like just showing up and doing the job and to realize like I still have people that support me and I'm not going to let them take anything away from me anymore. But there was definitely a time where I thought like I'll never be able to work in the running industry. Like I'm just blacklisted. Races don't like me, people don't like me. And so I've been really fortunate and like surprised, but also just like so happy that things have worked out the way they have, where I have been able to have a space in the sport that I love so much.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, like, obviously I have to imagine inside of Nike at the time when all of this was going down, maybe the answer to that question of like, where do I stand is complicated. Was it less complicated outside of Nike? Like, do you feel like you were surprised at how much maybe people in the industry, fellow runners, kind of stood by your side and said, like, what you did was right. I'm glad you did it. Or was it kind of one of those things where like maybe the rest of the industry is less interested than truth seeking than you are, and maybe they're more interested in like, how does this viewpoint impact my social belonging or my job in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, at first, no, I didn't feel like, oh, outside of Nike, things are fine. You know, I got like
Yeah.
pushback from even meet directors when I was still racing to come to their races. I remember on a
Wow.
message board, a race director actually like wrote that I was a liar, like on a like famous message board. Reporters would write about me on message boards or in comments on articles. And so I mean, I really had this feeling of like, I can't trust anyone, right? Like, I don't know who is actually my friend. I don't know who actually believes me. And a lot of the support that I got was really private because people didn't
Mm.
want to go down that path. Like, you know, like even old teammates, things like that. They'd be like, we're so proud of you. Thank you so much. But like, we cannot publicly support you for obvious reasons, right? Like they were still running for the swoosh and stuff. So I didn't feel supported or even felt like, I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but I didn't really feel safe in the industry for a long time. And then I think
Yeah.
as things moved on and like obviously when Salazar got banned for the first time, I think that helped a lot because it was like,
Mm.
okay, well, I mean, I wasn't just making it up, like things were happening and you know, and I think that helped a lot and that helped my own self-confidence of like, I know I'm in the right and I know I haven't done anything to hurt anybody. I've only told the truth. And I think that him getting banned in 2019 really helped me say, okay, I love this sport and I'm tired of sort of sitting on the outside wishing I could be in it. I'm going to get back in there and I'm going to do what I can do inside the sport.
Do you ever wonder if that ban hadn't happened, but obviously his history of wrongdoing was still clearly evident? If that ban hadn't happened, would things be a lot different for you in terms of reputation?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know that you and I would be talking. I just think you know, it's been amazing to me over the last year, the people that have said to me, "I just thought you were like a woman scorned," or "I just thought you were revengeful and I owe you
Mm.
an apology," or whatever they say. Like some people have actually like cried, men saying, "I just thought you were like a bitter woman." I'm like, "Okay, well, that's more about you than me."
Yeah.
But it's I'm like, "All right, you should think about that." Um, but it's been amazing, like the amount of people who have been nice to me and but with this like this qualifier of like, I didn't believe you, you know, and or I thought you were making a big thing out of nothing. And so that's like startling to hear, you know, like I just told the truth. That's all I did the whole
Yeah.
time. And so
Yeah.
it's those comments are like, I'm glad that they took the time to read the book. I'm glad that they took the time to really think about, you know, the way they were judging people. But you know, but that solidifies to me that without a ban, I wouldn't be able to do all the things I can do right now.
Do you think that the book has influenced any change in policy or overall culture at a company like Nike? Or do you feel like and again, assuming that you're observing things from the outside, maybe some contact with people on the inside, do you think anything has changed there, or are they still following the same playbook for marketing and how they handle athletes and whatnot as they were in 2012, 2013, 14?
I mean, I think one thing that hasn't changed is the pregnancy clause and the inability to reduce or suspend someone for having a baby. But there's hasn't been any big changes. Like there aren't women in sports marketing, right? Like there haven't been more women at the upper level there. And so it's tough because again, like I never want to like sell anyone out, but what I hear and also like no one from Nike talks to me. You know what I mean? Like nobody talks to me. But the few athletes that talk to me, it seems like no, things really haven't changed too much, which is too bad, right? I mean, the good news is the Oregon Project doesn't exist anymore, but a lot of the people that were involved in the Oregon Project are still there. They've just been shifted to other
Yeah.
athletes or other titles, and I think that's concerning. I mean, this was a program that was not good and it was not good for athletes and, you know, maybe you should just start over, and that's not what happened really, right? Alberta was removed, but everybody else remained, and so I think that tells you a lot.
This is kind of a weird question, but you just made me think about it in real time. Like, because Nike is so big, right? It's this behemoth that kind of hovers over the entire sport, and it's hard to kind of escape its shadow or its influence. Like, nobody can really disagree with that. A similar example is like, we live in this country, the United States, and I'll be the first person to say there's a ton of stuff about the history of the U.S. that I am not proud of, and yet, I hope to see the country still in like a good light and try to like trust in the better angels of its nature and like proceed from that, as opposed to dwelling on all of the evils that have been committed over the last 200 years. Is it possible to think of Nike in that same way, where it's this big, massive organization and there was a lot of wrongdoing, but maybe you can believe in, again, like their like original vision? Or do you just see it as like it's irredeemable and something needs to like totally be revamped there?
I don't think it's irredeemable. I know a lot of really great people that work at Nike, actually, that are really good people that have really good high ethical standards. They're not necessarily at the
Hmm.
top, but they are potentially the future. And so I don't think that
Yeah.
it's like a lost cause. For me, what's hard is it's like acknowledgement goes so far. Acknowledgement of, I think after the whole pregnancy thing with Alicia Montano and Alison Felix, and when Nike changed their contracts, they
Mm.
said, we admit that we had some bad policies in place. Well, why don't you like really acknowledge that? Let's talk about what that was. Or for instance, with my book, you paid millions and millions and millions of dollars defending someone who's an abuser, And so I wish
Yeah.
that we could just get a little acknowledgement because nobody's perfect and no company is perfect. I think that would go a
Yeah.
long way in moving forward in the company and the ethos of the company moving forward. But I will just say there are a lot of really good people there. And if they can stick it
Yeah.
out, they will be the future of the brand. And I'm hopeful that things will change by the time, my son is old enough to think about signing a contract or something like that, as if he's going to be like that good. But I'm just saying, I'm hoping that at that time, 10, 15 years from now, there will be a flux, especially in the sports marketing department, where it is fresh blood and there
Yeah.
are women and it is a more thoughtful process.
Right on. And I know I'm kind of scattered here, but you mentioned the pregnancy clause again, and it reminds me because, again, not every athlete is going to have to endure what you endured as a pro athlete, but they might have similar challenges from like a career trajectory standpoint. And like, I'm thinking about the pregnancy clause, and I'm thinking about how, like, and you mentioned this in the book, shoe contracts are a runner's lifeline, and not many of these brands, if any at all, mentor or prepare pros for a second act or a pivot in the running industry. And so maybe before we get into like ways that you think about solutions to this, talk about some of the examples in the book where you were really affected by these forces, like the pregnancy clause.
Yeah, so there was no pregnancy wasn't in a Nike contract. In fact, when I first signed with Nike in 2001, my then fiance was asking Nike, Adam, well, what if she were to get pregnant? And I remember being like, oh my God, I can't believe you're saying this. I'm not going to get pregnant, but he had the foresight of like, well, hopefully she's going to run for 10 years. At some point, she might want to have a baby. And what I was told at the time was, we deal with that on a case by case basis. So when I decided to get
Yeah.
pregnant, it was an open conversation. I had fertility issues. It was an open conversation that this was going to take a while. What's the best time to fit it in? And everyone at Nike knew about it. And I just said, I want to know what's going to happen with my contract. And I was told nothing, stay relevant. And so I've been told by people inside at Nike that during my pregnancy, I was the number one requested female athlete at Nike at the time. And I was all over the place on magazine covers and going to photo shoots and meeting with people and meeting with children and meeting with moms. And, then to find out like, and I wasn't even notified that I wasn't going to get paid anymore. My financial
Yeah.
advisor was like, oh, your payment didn't come in. And so it caused this really stressful time in my life where I wasn't getting paid, but I had to return quickly because I had broken my contract by letting too much time pass between races. So instead of like healing my body a week after giving birth, I'm out running. 10 days after giving birth, I'm back at practice. And it was terrible. I mean,
Yeah.
it just was so bad. And I feel like it set me up for repetitive injuries sort of for the rest of my career because I was just constantly always trying to
Mm.
like band-aid everything because I was already on the chopping block of getting a reduction or a suspension or whatever. So when these things are really real, and I think it shortened my career, I do think that. And I think if I was given the ability to take my time and return to racing when I was ready, we could have had all the media hoopla, and maybe we could have had like an Ellie St. Pierre moment, right? Where I came back strong and actually ready to be there. And so I am encouraged by what I see now, which is companies letting women take the time to heal from their pregnancy, start training when their bodies are ready to start training. And even Nike
Mm.
now has a situation where I think you have a full year to come back. And that's huge because that actually makes people healthier, helps their careers last longer, and makes for these like fantastic moments, like seeing Rachel Smith win the 15K or seeing Ellie St. Pierre become world
Yeah.
champion when her son is 2
Yeah.
days away from turning 1, you know? So, but for me, I didn't have that. And it affected my life greatly. I was basically told you have to get back to race, and then I wasn't being paid. And I was told if I win the Boston Marathon, all of this will go away, which is really tall order for anyone, but especially when the Boston Marathon is going to be 6.5 months after you gave birth. So it just caused me to make really poor choices for my own health. And it did for the remainder of my contract.
Do you feel like it costs you like an entire Olympic marathon trial cycle? Like, will we've seen you competing like well into the 2020s, or how much of a hit do you think it was for you?
You know, I really struggled with my pelvic floor and my hip for the rest of my career, and I still struggle with it, to be honest with you. I don't know that I would have made the team in 2016, but I think I would have been able to keep racing at a higher level. I just think so much time and energy and emotion was wasted, and physically I was always injured. I mean, I made the Olympic team, but then I got injured. I made the world championship team, but then I got injured. And I think I don't know that I necessarily would have like made another Olympic team or podiumed at another major, but I do know that the races I did run could have been so much better if I could have chosen to run them, and I could have gone into them. If I could have started a training block healthy, you know, I just think it could have been really different for me. And just even emotionally, not always feeling like there's a sword on my throat, you know, like things aren't really clicking. I'm actually going to take that half marathon off the table. I couldn't do that. I didn't have a choice to do that.
Are you seeing any, like, because you just mentioned that, you know, pregnancy clauses are becoming more common and there is more support in 2024 than there ever has been in this area for female athletes. Are you seeing any evidence around just like general career support for pro runners too, where, you know, either there is just more general like leniency around managing injuries and returning to competition, or even like pipelines into like, you know, another career in the sport as like, you know, like a brand marketing person or a coach, shoe designer, stuff like that?
I do think that there are some companies that are thinking outside the box, and seeing athletes have value outside of their performance. I think the typical shoe contract is still performance based. You know, your bonuses are based on how you do at races. But I do think there are
Yeah.
some companies thinking outside the box of, hey, this person is captivating. Maybe they're not the best, but there's a place for them still here with us. They're connecting with people, they're inspiring people. There's still a way to use this athlete, even though they may not be the best.
Yeah.
But I mean, I also hear from athletes all the time that their contracts are still really strict, and it's about performance, and it's not about who you are as a person. And I think there's a delicate balance there, right? Like you can't just say, oh, you have 1 million followers on Instagram, like let's just give you a huge contract. I think there's like a delicate balance there. But I think we're still working it out.
Switching gears, there is a theme that comes up constantly from start to finish in the book, sort of around taking responsibility and taking action to fix things that you see as wrong or sort of broken in the running world. And yeah, you certainly lived up to that throughout your career, it seems. For people in the audience that are inspired by sort of this like disposition, is outspokenness, like, is that a muscle that you constantly have to exercise, or can you experience a moment in your life like you did with the Oregon Project that sort of gives you this like sense of liberation and like a permanent confidence to speak up when necessary?
Look, if I can speak up, anyone can. I'm actually like super shy. I hate conflict so much. I am a total people pleaser. Um, but I think I just got to a point where I knew I could help. And I knew that by staying silent, I was actually becoming an enabler of bad behavior. And so it just came to a point where I just felt like I had to tell what I saw, you know, and for me, it was originally going to USADA very privately and quietly. But like people will say, oh, you're brave or you're courageous. I'm like, no, I'm not. I am like a weenie. I am shy. I don't want to fight with anyone. So that's my point, is
Yeah.
that anyone can speak up and like they can hold their truth, and it can matter for other people. I think it's just, for me, it was like, it just got to a point where I didn't feel guilty that I had done something wrong, but I started to feel guilty that I could maybe stop people who were doing something wrong. And that is what started to keep me up at night. It made me feel like if I'm not part of the solution, I'm actually part of the problem.
Yeah. That's something I've wondered a lot about, like when an athlete goes to the negotiating table with a brand or they're interfacing with a coach that might not be the best fit for them, and they're sort of condoning the norms that are taking place there. They aren't only, shortchanging themselves, but I have to imagine they are setting up future athletes for similar failure. So I would assume that for any athlete out there that is like thinking about what you just went through, you're not just speaking up for yourself, right? Like you're speaking up for the next generation that's coming behind you.
For sure. And also I was in a position where I was so lucky. I had done well financially and I could take that risk and I could say, hey, if no one wants to work with me, I can still make it work on my own. So I acknowledge like the privilege of where I was coming from. But it's true. I mean, if I didn't do that, there would still be no changes in pregnancy things, and there would still be Salazar would still be coaching. And it's, at some point, it's just like you have to really realize that the truth is power and you have the ability to change it. There's going to be another person coming behind you who's going to be in this situation. You could have stopped it.
I don't want to get too much into the Oregon Project stuff, mostly because for those that haven't read the book, I think it's awesome to sort of experience yourself. But set the scene for what made this group and what made this coach, Alberto Salazar, so initially appealing, and what sold you and the rest of your teammates on the opportunity to run there?
It was just professionalized running in a way we had never seen. Like Adam and I went to visit and they're sleeping in an altitude house. So the house is like they're living at altitude, even though they're living in Portland. So they're getting, their body is constantly producing red blood cells. They have underwater treadmills in the backyard. So if you're bored, you can just go get in an extra run. The facilities are amazing. This beautiful track in the woods, obviously everyone knows about it, but like beautiful grass fields to train on. What was then the Lance Armstrong Center, which had all of the weight things you could ever want. And then as a person who had been injury prone like I had, it was, massage therapists, PT, like ART therapists. I mean, everything you could ever want. Like if I felt my shin was a little sore, I'd have an MRI that afternoon. If I had to have surgery, it was happening the next day. I mean, it was like a dream. And you're working with one of the best coaches in the world, some of the best experts in the world. Alberta would always have different coaches coming in and talking to us, teaching us drills, teaching us different ways to think, different ways to work out. I mean, we worked with sprint experts, right? So that we could sprint better. And not to mention then just like all of the gadgets, like Alter Gs are super common now, but we had the very first prototype, things like that we just had access to. And so, I remember Adam, we went there on our, kind of like recruiting visit. And I didn't want to go there. I wanted to go to Wisconsin and live by my family. I'm a homebody. And I was like, this is my opportunity to live by my family. And we just looked at each other and we were just like, we'd be crazy not to give this a shot. Like, this is like nothing anywhere else in the world, especially then, was doing. It was just anything that you could ever want to be healthy and good was there and waiting for you. And I remember talking to Dan Paff, who was with the team just for a little bit. He ended up leaving pretty early, but I remember talking with him and I was like, the only reason I want to say no is because I'm afraid if I come here and I don't make it, it's because I'm just not good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about the story that Alberto is telling about what the group is going to do and how things are going to operate? Like the culture is that story and sort of like motivational climate, is that appealing to you as well?
Yeah, it was like, we're going to outwork everyone. We are going to outwork everyone. You're going to go to the starting line and know that you have worked harder than anyone else. And then you have recovered better than anyone else. And you have left no stone unturned. And of course, like, that makes you feel confident, right? Like, you want to go to the starting line being like, well, I don't know what you guys did, but I know it wasn't what I did. I know it wasn't the hours that I put in and all the things that I put in. And that's really appealing. And at first too, like it definitely changed over the years, but at first it was like, we're going to train for that window of opportunity. And when we get it, we are going to be so ready. We're going to seize it. We didn't talk about winning medals and things like that at first. At first we talked about getting as good as we can be, outworking everyone and taking advantage of those opportunities when they arose. And as the program went on, my last few years there, we did talk more and more about specifically like winning medals, but that's not how it was when we first got there. It was like, we're going to do everything right. We're going to outwork everyone, and we're going to take advantage of other people's mistakes.
If things hadn't turned negative the way they did today in 2024, does that original ethos of the group still appeal to you, or has your philosophy around what it takes to be great changed?
No, I actually still really believe that. Like, I do believe like you can't guarantee your success, but you can get yourself as ready as you can be and take advantage of opportunities. And I believe you can outwork people and be smarter on your recovery and the things you do. And so, like what I signed on for originally, I actually still think is kind of great. I really do. I'm like, yeah, you get
Yeah.
therapy, you're constantly being taken care of, you work your butt off, you have a team, you have teammates that are working with you. I mean, we got really close as a group. And again, I love the attitude of, we're not expecting greatness. We're going to get everything we can out of you. And if the window opens, you're going to be right there to go through it, or if the door opens. But I actually still really I like that ideal. I like that thought. It just turned out that's not what the group was truly about.
Once you start to notice like the abusive dynamics and the suspected cheating and all these just practices that don't align with your values, obviously the story ends in a positive light because you take this awesome action and you change the sport in a great way. But like for athletes like you and other athletes in the program that are initially living with it, what compels you for a time period to stay silent, and why?
I think it for me personally, in my own experience, it was sort of slow over time. It was like little things that I was like, oh, I don't really like that. But, I could explain it away. I could kind of justify it. I always say like, I am a world-class compartmentalizer. And I think most athletes are. It's like, like you're an ultra athlete. It's like, you can't think about all these other things. You have to be in the moment. So you just put it in a box and put it away, because that's not helping your performance right now. So you're just going to shove that away. And I think that helped me survive a lot of tough things in my life. But I think it also made me really susceptible, because I had the ability to say, oh, that makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm just going to put it to the side. And even as things like increasingly got worse, I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do? I mean, my entire life is tied up here. My dreams are tied up here. Everything that I want is tied up in this group. And if I leave, I'll have nothing, and I'll have lost everything that I've sacrificed the last 5-6 years to have and to be,
Yeah.
this is my ticket to the top. This is the ticket to all of my dreams. And so if I leave, then I'm nothing, and I've lost everything, and everything I ever wanted in my life, and everything I've been doing is for nothing. So I think it's really easy to convince yourself to stay, and to convince yourself to just justify things. I mean, I was just like amazing at justifying it, putting it in a box, moving on.
You have another great quote in the book where you say, and I wrote this down, sometimes it takes being confronted by a healthy alternative to realize how unhealthy the past was. And so I know we're skipping a lot of the timeline, but like when you get to that point in the turmoil, explain how that happened to you. Like explain how you had spent all this time in sort of an abusive system, and then you saw the light elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky. I ran for Jerry Schumacher for 2 years, and then I reunited with my college coach, Mark Wetmore. And, like they would be encouraging, but then they wouldn't call me at night, or text me or ask me about my relationship, or, it was so different. Like I would just show up, run my heart out, and then I could leave it there. And it didn't like stick with me all day. And I wasn't being judged outside of what was happening at practice, right? Like whatever happened at practice, they expected both Jerry and Mark expected me to come, do the work, not complain, get it done. But then that was it. There was no other questions about like, well, what are you going to be doing the rest of the day? And how is Adam doing? And how's that affecting you? And it just made me start to realize how over involved Alberto had been in my life, and how much I spent emotional energy constantly worrying about what he was going to think about the things that I was doing. And he was my whole world. It's really sad to say, but he was. And I thought about pleasing him nonstop. And when I started running for Jerry and he'd be like, all right, I'll see you in a few days. It'd be like, wait, what? What do you mean you're not going to call me 50 times and text me and check in and, and yeah. And I think too, just, like having a coach that took responsibility in your performance as well. I think like for the Olympic trials in Rio, I got fourth, and I remember I went into Mark's office and started crying, and I was apologizing, and he was like, whoa, 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 you did everything we asked you to do. Like, I remember he said, you're acting like an abuse victim. Like, come on, we still care about each other. We still believe in each other. I obviously missed a piece of the puzzle. You did everything I asked you to do. And that was a huge light bulb moment for me too, that I still hadn't really let go of that feeling of just pleasing everyone, especially pleasing my coach.
Obviously, like Alberto has this negative superpower where he can convince athletes to buy into that like 24/7 monitoring check-in, which is clearly unhealthy. Was that something that he was successful with just for a particular type of athlete, or was it team-wide where regardless of your personality or how you were able to be motivated and stuff like that, he found a way to have that sort of rub off on somebody and achieve buy-in?
I think he's just really charismatic. He is. And he can make you believe. I mean, when he talks to you, he looks you in the eye and you feel like you're the only person on the planet and he believes in you. And so I think he's just really good at that, which I think is part of why he had such success as a coach. Like athletes really, really buy in. But I'll also say too, there was a hierarchy, right? And it was like Galen Rupp, Kara Goucher, Dathan Ritzenhein. And then when Mo came, it was like Galen, Mo, Kara, or whatever, right? So I was getting a lot more attention than a lot of my teammates ever got, and including my husband. Like at first, Adam was the superstar of the Gouchers, and then he was quickly tossed aside. So I think, yeah. I think he's good. He's just good at getting you to believe. Like it's a strength for him, but sometimes he takes it too far, obviously.
What are the parts of this experience that you feel you have fully healed and moved on from? And what are the parts that you feel you're still working to reconcile?
I feel really good. I was in a lot of therapy while I was doing this book. And obviously at that time too, not only was I testifying in the USADA hearings, which turned into CAS hearings because Alberto appealed, but I was also testifying with Safe Sport. So I was just really overwhelmed with testifying and then also just reliving a lot of stuff. I feel, the night before this book came out, I was like so stressed out. I was like, I cannot believe why did I think this was a good idea to share all this stuff with the world? And that morning that, it was on Good Morning America and all this stuff. And I didn't watch any of it. And I just went for a run. But when I got back, I just felt so free. Like I'm not carrying around anyone else's secrets anymore. So to be honest, like I feel so whole. And I don't feel ashamed of a lot of the stuff that I felt ashamed of even just a year ago. It catches me off guard when it does affect me. Like I was at the Olympic marathon trials and I was at the press conference and Alfine Tulimuk like thanked me for my work in helping moms. And that I started crying. That actually caught me off guard because I was like, oh man, like I wish I could sit up there with my child at a press conference and have it be like this. And I'm so happy that it is like this. And it just made me realize like, oh, I was still grieving that I didn't have that experience. But in general, I feel really good and happy. And in a weird way, this book really, really helped me confront things that I never would have confronted without doing the book.
I have to imagine, and I've heard a lot of athletes say this, that when they are either when they experience somebody close to them who has been cheating, caught doping, or they just see the news that a colleague in the sport doped and that contributed to their success, they're sort of forever stained, or their mind is tainted in the sense that they can no longer enjoy the sport. Like every single time they see a breakthrough in the marathon or in the 800 or whatever event it is, they can't help but think, is that runner clean? Is that your lens, or are you able to kind of like step away from the cynicism and be really optimistic and trusting in what's happening in the sport today?
Yeah, I think I can wear a few different hats, right? Like I'm on the board at USADA and I'm a little bit more like, not bitter, but like a little bit more negative there, where I don't feel like we're catching as many people as we should be catching. And I don't feel like the stats reflect what's really happening. But then when I'm talking to my son or his friends, I'm like really positive. And because I do believe you can make it as a clean athlete, I believe it. I know it, you know? And so I kind of can wear two hats. Sometimes when I'm calling races, if I'm being honest, I know what I'm calling is not real. But I've had to really just learn to, and I've had people say like, how could you call that race with that person in there? But that's not the place to talk about that kind of stuff. That's the place to just like revel in what our sport can be. And when I call races, I really just go back to the person who was in awe, like my high school self that was just in awe of everyone and didn't know anything. So this is a roundabout way of saying like, I can go there and I can get kind of down and I can think like the sport still has a ton of problems, but I think my love of the sport outweighs that. And so I'm always looking for a way to find the positive in all of it.
Do you think it's harder to cheat now, or are the dopers always going to be one step ahead?
I think the dopers are one step ahead. I think that we need to go to more investigative stuff. I don't think if you get caught on a drug test, I mean, this is like so harsh, but you're kind of an idiot. I think everyone knows the system. People, there's like, you can't be tested from like 11 p.m. till 6 a.m. People know how to microdose. So for me, it's more, I feel like people are still getting away with it. And I wish we would switch to a more investigative model. I can say from experience that USADA kind of tried that in the Cass case with Salazar, used some of their investigative stuff, and Cass wasn't ready for it. They were like, if there's not a positive test, there's not a positive test. And I think so for me, that needs to switch from like the top down. Like we need to really start thinking about different ways because I mean, if you follow me on Twitter, I'm like the most sad follow because all I do is announce all the people serving drug bans when they are announced. But I still think that's just a small fraction. And so I think we need to think differently about how we catch people. I think it's the same as it was in the 80s that the people who want to dope are ahead of the tests. And that's just the reality of it. Like remember designer steroids, they were designed to fall apart in the refrigerator once your sample is refrigerated. So you think in the 80s they were doing it, we're not going to be doing it now in the 2020s. Like I hate to be a pessimist, but no, we still have a problem. And I think it's still really, I don't want to say it's easy to get away with it, but I think if people know what they're doing and they're surrounded by certain people, they can get away with it.
For people that are hearing about this for the first time, actually, this is something I'm not very familiar with, the investigative model. What does that like practically look like? Like you mentioned it in the Salazar case, but like in a future hypothetical, what does that involve versus the standard today?
So I think like, we have biological passports, so abnormalities in your biological passport, but if you really look at someone's blood work, if you're able to gain access, you can see changes that are just not humanly possible, but maybe they're still within the range and they're not going to get flagged. So things like that, like really getting into people's blood work more often, like, I mean, that's never going to happen. Here's the problem. None of this is going to happen because athletes already, not everyone, but a lot of athletes already complain that they don't have enough freedom. But I would love like a program where you're constantly giving blood and people are monitoring that. And then also this is the part where I don't know that we could ever truly go this way, but people going through your emails, who are you talking to? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like connecting the dots. If someone's doing EPO, they didn't just like create it. They had to get it from somewhere. So how did they get it? And who's that person? And who else are they talking to? And I think too, when we see a lot of these coaches and agents that have multiple drug busts, like what are we doing? There's one common cancer here, right? There's all these athletes that are serving bans, but the coaches and the agents aren't. So that's another thing I'd love to see governing bodies start going after agents and coaches, which is super controversial. And agents hate it when I say that. And I think if you hate it when I say it, it's because probably you might know more than you should.
It's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting proposition to think that, in the years to come, if we ever did move to this fully, and athletes would just have to expect if they're going to enter this realm of the sport, they're going to be under much stricter scrutiny they're going to give up some freedom, and there are going to be data points in their life that are going to be constantly available. This is a super weird example, but it makes me think of like the marketing world, the influencer world, where there's a dashboard of Instagram metrics and Twitter metrics and conversions that are just out in the wide open for your brand partners to see and evaluate on. And it kind of keeps the relationship honest. It's a super different, maybe kind of a reach example, but it's the first thing I could think of. I would love to see that. I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I would love to see more transparency and things like that. But I know that even at USADA, Travis Tigart disagrees with me. He feels like athletes are giving up enough as it is. I don't think it's that hard, especially with the technology that's getting better and better. Like you can just do like the dried blood test now. Like you don't even have to take a vial out of your arm.
Yeah.
They can just get a little prick and get one little dried blood spat. It would be so easy for athletes to be constantly doing that and building their, their little treasure trove of results. So I don't know. I think it's something has to change, because the system isn't really working great right now. I mean, some people like to say it's working great, and they'll point to all the tests that I put on my Twitter of people who got caught. But well, how come all the people getting caught are like B-level athletes? That doesn't make sense either. So I don't feel like it's working. And I know that there are people who care. I truly believe, I know that USADA cares. But I just think, like we were saying, I mean, I've gotten to know Tyler Hamilton over the years, and he was able to dope and knew how to avoid the testing and knew what to do and how to take it and when to take it. So, and all of none of that has changed. So we got to think differently.
Well, Kara, thank you so much for being on the show today. The book, again, it's called The Longest Race. I know we glossed over a lot of critical topics. That was intentional on my part because I really want to encourage people to read this book. I think it's a very important story to be aware of and educated on. So we'll link to that in the show notes. I always give the guest the final word. Are there any final calls to action or thoughts you want to leave the audience with before we go?
I just don't want to end on a negative note, right? Like I do think that doping is a problem in our sport, but I also love our sport so much. And so even after everything I've been through and witnessed, I just want people to like watch the meets that are on TV, pay attention to the marathons, watch the ultra marathons. Like our sport is really life-changing. And so, yeah, there are some bad seeds in there, but the overwhelming majority of people are just awesome, and what they're doing is incredible and inspiring.